No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And welcome to our 4th holiday hack for this season. We're talking about the most watched leadership videos on YouTube by Gen Z, either current or emerging leaders. This has been a great list so far. And if you haven't listened to the first 3, please feel free to go back and do that. On this episode, we're going to be talking about a video by Rosalind Torres. She's the former managing director for Boston Consulting Group in New York. And she has a video and a TED Talk called What It Takes to Be a Great Leader. I like this video a lot. It asks some really poignant questions that I think are relevant today, even though the video is a couple of years old. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Like, I love the questions that she asks, and I think about there's a lot of times where I'm asking similar questions in a different way, but I do like the intention of the way that she asks these questions and why it's so relevant today when it comes to leadership, what we're seeing, what needs to kind of evolve and change, and how we're setting ourselves up for the future.
Right. She starts out with this question around why is it that there seems to be so many gaps in leadership, given that as the years go on, organizations spend more and more time and money and investment on leadership development. And it's like if you would think that the gaps would be lessening as opposed to widening with that kind of investment into it, and they're just not. And so she talks about kind of three areas that she has seen based on her travels and her studies where leaders, where the great leaders kind of shine. And the first one she says is that great leaders are very intentional about where they spend their time around anticipating change. And I like this one a lot because it really says basically if you are reactive, you've already lost. You have to anticipate what's going to happen so that you can react to it in advance, because the speed with which you can do that will make all the difference in the world with your ability to kind of lead as time goes on and as things change as fast as they do.
Yeah, I like this one a lot because I think sometimes we get caught in the moment of just what's going on in our jobs, in our industry, whether we're having a good quarter, a good year, or maybe it's a tough quarter, a tough year, and you're really kind of just dialed into what's happening in front of you, and we're not taking the time to kind of lift our head up and look around and like what else are we seeing? Is this a trend that's happening across the industry that we work in? Is this something that is impacting everyone? Is it just my organization? Is it something that are we seeing some technology or some different approaches, or are we seeing competitors in the same space that we're in doing things in a different way or presenting different solutions? Like I think leaders spending time thinking about the bigger picture that way, I think is really, really important, because it makes you start to think about, well, what would I have to do if that was a change that I have to deal with here? And how can I start to imagine the skills that I would need my people to have to be able to work through a major change?
Right. The second question that she says to ask is around the diversity of your network. But I like the way that she presents it, because it starts out from the standpoint of you want to make sure you have a diverse network, both professionally and personally. The way she frames it is that what is your capacity to develop relationships with people that are very different than you? And I like the way she says it that way, because it's not just about having a diverse network. It's about what are the skills necessary in order to create and maintain a diverse personal and professional network. It doesn't just happen. You don't get to having a diverse network doesn't just come from making an effort. It implies that the people who don't have a diverse network, that it's only because they've almost chosen not to. And it's more than that. You can't just choose to. You have to have the skills necessary to be able to create that, and that involves making sure that you have what it takes to not just reach out to people, but to show that you can create connection with people where there doesn't necessarily seem to be any connection on the surface. I like this a lot because it doesn't just look at it from a standpoint of effort. There's an actual skill set that goes into this.
I'm spot on with you on this one, because I think that when you meet new people, when you're introduced to new networks of people, and if you have a diverse network personally, professionally, a lot of times you're going to kind of, like magnets will attract when they have like similar things that they see, how they see the world, how they see each other, how they see, all different types of things.
But those are the
It's
easy
very-
ones.
yeah, exactly. It's very easy to fall into those, right? Like, hey, we're already kind of aligned on a bunch of things, so like we can be friends.
Yep.
But I think that really understanding and considering exactly who you have around you, and having the curiosity and the commitment to say, I'm having trouble maybe connecting with this person or this individual. I'm not exactly like, I don't seem to see the things the same way that they do, and I want to go spend the time to figure out, why that is, or how I can make a better connection, or start to build a relationship. And then I think, like with all relationships over time, when you have a lot of time together, and I immediately think of like friends from school, where it's just like you're kind of forced to spend a lot of time together because of the school that you're at, the classes that you're at, the sports that you play. And while you might not necessarily like select that as your first friend group, over time you start to establish really, really deep connections. And I think that's in those situations you're kind of forced to do it, and that can happen sometimes at work as well. But it only continues after the day to day, if you are truly committed and you're genuinely trying to make connections with people.
Right. And the benefit of doing this is that the more diverse your network is, both professionally and personally, the more that you are able to, what she says, I mean, it's about pattern recognition. So if you can recognize patterns of human behavior, and if you can recognize how people act and react, you're more likely to be able to make decisions that are in the spirit of what's, going back to her first question, what's around the corner. Being able to anticipate the future and make the right moves is much easier to do if you are confident in those decisions, because you've bounced that information off a lot of different places, as opposed to just the people who are, maybe the cheerleaders that you have around you, that you may, they may help prop you up, and they may, add a lot of benefit to your life, but are they the ones that are going to make sure that you're aware when you are, barking up the wrong tree, or if you're making the wrong decisions? Having people who are close enough to you to where they will give you that information regardless, those are the people who are going to steer you in the right direction. I want to talk about the last question that she asks is around, is about courage. Are you courageous enough to abandon the comfortable, successful past? And I think this is maybe the most important of the three. So I want to talk about that, but first I want to give up the word for one of our sponsors. All right, so this question, do you have the courage to abandon the comfortable and successful past? We see this all the time in terms of how companies fail, and it's not just on a company-wide basis, but individual leaders can fail for the same reasons, which is that I'm doing this because it always worked, and who are you to tell me that I shouldn't do this anymore because it always worked? We saw this in terms of the number of leaders that were very, very successful, especially in retail in the 1990s and early 2000s, and they seemed to become irrelevant all of a sudden around 2005, 2010. And it wasn't because they stopped doing their job well. It was because they continued to do the exact same job they were doing for the previous 20 years when it did work. And now all of a sudden it's not working, but they don't have the courage to abandon these things, or to see that they will need to be abandoned in order to kind of develop new skills or look at new ways of leading people. And as the workforce changes, this is going to be constantly necessary, not just on a generational basis, but I think the changes are going to be happening more and more often, not just every 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree. And we've talked a lot about this, just around the evolution of leadership and leadership expectations, and the workforce and what's being asked of leaders. And I think that there are some pillars of leadership that I think will always be relevant, and they're big ones too. They're integrity and trust and honesty, and more like the values-based elements of leadership. When it comes to things like inspiration, motivation, connection, I think these are the spaces that will continue to have a change or an adjustment in direction, or a higher bar of expectation. There's going to be a lot of those types of things that are going on. And I think that for a lot of leaders, to your point, that have been doing leadership for a long time, those two things can kind of meld together. It's kind of like, well, nope, like I'm always going to have integrity, and I'm going to be honest with my team. I'm also going to be, very rigid in how I am when it comes to flexibility with hours worked and schedules and things like that. Like there's just you can't marry those things together. And I think that for a lot of leaders, it's going to take some self reflection and some real good self awareness to understand. And I think also like to learn from the up and coming leaders that are almost making some of it look a little bit easy, or they're just very comfortable in that space.
Right. We've all seen the leader that looks like they aren't working, and yet they are. They tend to have people who want to follow them. It looks like they are. They're great at making relationships with people, and they're doing their job well. But yet it looks like they've made it look relatively easy, and it could be easy to jump to the assumption that like, oh, they're not doing anything. How come they're not? How come they don't look like they're stressed out, right? And it's because they're not. It's because what they're doing is they're leaning into the skills that come naturally to them. And if these skills don't come naturally to you, it doesn't mean you can't be a good leader. It just means you have to work at it. You have to work at developing the skills that will allow you to lead in whatever space that you're in, and being able to recognize what those skills are, because every organization is different and every team is different. You have to be able to recognize what those things are and then lean into those things. The question that she asked specifically, or the kind of the skill set that she says is, you have to develop the emotional stamina to withstand people telling you that your idea is stupid. And I like this because there's a duality to that. Meaning, when I first heard her say this in the video, my initial thought was, well, you also have to make sure that you're not steamrolling over people because you think you have a great idea. What if it is stupid, right? Mm. And so this isn't just a matter of like, the buck stops with me and I'm the leader, so I'm going to make a decision, and I'm not going to listen to people telling me my idea is stupid. It's about that if the people who are telling you to not move forward with whatever your idea is, if those are the people who are trying to say, no, don't change something, keep things the way that they are, keep doing things how we've been doing it, don't try to change anything, that's where your feelers have to go up and think, okay, do I have the courage to move forward away from the past, even though it was successful? Because if someone's telling you not to change something, they're likely rooting that kind of that advice in the idea that why would you stop doing what works, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And being a good leader, according to Rosalind Torres, is not just about continuing to do something until it stops working. It's about anticipating that it's going to stop working so that you can make the changes and be, kind of have a team that is good at the skills already needed when you have to abandon that, because eventually you will. Like, you'll have to abandon those strategies of the past eventually. So why not anticipate when they're going to happen and start building the skills for what will be needed instead?
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.